Hi, welcome to Mold Week. I'm Erin Knight here with my friend and colleague Bridgit Danner, who is your host of this event. I'll be interviewing her today and asking her a little bit about the event and her own history. So welcome, Bridgit. Thanks for hosting this event. I'm so excited to learn about what we can do to protect ourselves from mold.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Erin, and interviewing me. You hosted a big headache event this summer, and our mutual friend said, well, Erin's a good interviewer, so appreciate you coming on, and I know you kind of know this health world.
Yeah, but I don't know too much about mold, so I'm really interested to learn more and also hear what prompted you to host this special event and, invite all these guests and put this on.
Yeah, so when I heard about Hurricane Harvey, coming on to land in Texas, Louisiana, I had this pang that probably a lot of people who have been affected by mold had, which is, oh crap, like a lot of people are going to get mold. And yeah. I was scared, I was scared for them. Having your health affected by mold is really serious and very, not enough awareness about it. And luckily, in a disaster, things can be averted. But you really need to educate yourself, which is why I put on this event. I just wanted to share a few statistics about what's going on just this hurricane season, which, as we know, was really bad. But unfortunately, it won't be the last one. 185,000 homes were damaged by Harvey. 87,000 flood insurance claims had been filed as of September 22nd. 90% of the homes in the Florida Keys were damaged or destroyed. So
90%?
90%. I know, I hadn't even heard that. Barbuda, which none of us had heard of until it was a bit, 95% of the buildings were damaged. On the island of St. Martin, 2/3 of the homes were damaged or destroyed. Puerto Rico, $95 billion in damage. People don't have electricity. I was just hearing about the hospitals. Only the hospitals are running, no clinics, and people are coming in for respiratory infections already. So there's a lot of people being affected right now, and there's a lot of people being affected all the time. As you'll hear about in my own case, or Dave Asprey, who's speaking on the summit, there are these disasters where we know water has come in and damaged our home, and then there's water leaking behind a wall that we don't even know about, or there's, little kind of plumbing accidents and overflowed bathtubs and that kind of a thing inside a home. And, all of these things can be devastating in their own way.
Absolutely. So it's really timely now with what's happened, at least in the U.S. this year, but it could be of interest to people, just to educate themselves, because there's likely to be more and more of these big hurricanes and things like that. So it's a good idea just to get educated. And then, like you're saying, there could be smaller incidents where your house is affected by water damage. What about people that live in like a humid environment, like the Pacific Northwest? Are there just inherently molds around that people might be affected even if there hasn't been a natural disaster?
Yeah, I think in a wetter climate, you do have more of a tendency for mold growth, certainly. And I think I used to take things like, moldy windowsills or whatever as being kind of like no big deal. But if you don't process toxic mold, if you're growing a toxic mold and you don't process it well, these little things, or just having a bathroom that doesn't, like aerate properly.
Yeah.
These things can be a problem. I don't want to say that every time you see mold, it's toxic and you're going to get really sick, because that's an over-exaggeration. However, especially if you have a genetic tendency to not process toxic mold well, it can be a small area that can really affect you, depending on the type of mold. So yeah, we just moved to the desert, and the biggest motivator was to get away from, we had just become very sick with mold, and we just were like, we can't be challenged with a wet environment anymore. In the Northwest, maybe not as much where you live, but where I live in Portland, there's so many old homes too, and
okay,
sometimes you can say old homes could be Some people say old homes could be safer because there's more air going through them. But in the case of, our old home, it had a lot of additions and, new windows and stuff like that. And that created a lot of problems too. So I think old buildings or new buildings could be damaged. Certainly you can still have water leaks in a place like the desert. There is more of a tendency for water to dry faster though.
How did you realize that you were being affected that your health was being affected by the mold in your house? Like what prompted moving states is a pretty dramatic solution, right? To that. So it must have been a really big deal in your health and your life to take some big steps like that.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few ways to find out you have mold that I kind of mentioned, natural disaster, leak that you see, and then getting sick, which was my story. And frankly, looking back, I just saw a new doctor this morning and I wrote a timeline. I think I had some tendency to be sensitive to mold my whole life. And I just actually remembered this week that we had mold growing in the bathroom of our college house. And I think that's the same year I developed asthma. So I never made that connection until literally this week. Wow. So I think I had mold exposure. I was in the house that we were in for nearly 10 years. So I was in there, as I've been in a long time. But we had a very wet fall. And I was getting sick like every month. And then I got a really sore throat. And I could tell it was like strep throat. And I felt like I had like an Epstein-Barr kind of flare-up that had been in my history, and I went to urgent care, which I never do. And the first time I was kind of dismissed, but I didn't get better. So then I went back in and I had strep throat and I had to treat it. I never take antibiotics, but I just kind of had to. And then after that, I wasn't getting better. My throat was better, but I was just so tired. And I did some vitamin therapy, IV therapy at our naturopathic college in Portland, and I just wasn't feeling better from it. So I asked them, I was like, you got to help me, figure out what's going on. And they ran some tests for autoimmune diseases and that kind of a thing. And they also asked me about my home. They said, what's new in your home? And we had gotten a cat. That was new. But also we had all this moisture, and we'd always had this funky basement. It always kind of smelled. And then we had a legitimate water leak that was onto the carpet and the drywall. And didn't take it that seriously, to be honest. We also had the cat, all its stuff down there, so I was going down there a lot. And I had just started around that time working at home, full time. Yeah. So great time to be in the house. So they suggested, what about this bit? You could get tested for mold. So my husband really agreed. He had always been curious, and we had someone come out and run tests, and I'll talk more about that later, how to do that. But he found toxic mold. I didn't want to be tested, Erin. I was like,
when you say get tested, are they testing your body or are they testing the house?
They're testing the house. There's an inspector to test. He tested some drywall samples and air samples, and they did a visual inspection for mold spores, for signs of leakage, current leakage, past leakage, how the gutters were arranged. Things about a house that I don't like to think about. I like to think about decorating. I don't like to think about the gutters. So it was a good learning experience for me that, a house primarily is a place to protect us from the elements, and we need to be careful with the structure of our home. But I didn't want it inspected because I knew if it was found, what a disaster the whole thing would be. And it was, to be frank, and partly that was our lack of knowledge about how to do things right. But that was my instigator, was
you weren't feeling good for a long time. So are there typical symptoms that are specific for mold toxicity, or what I heard you describing was just kind of lingering symptoms that eventually you don't have any answer for, so you might want to question if mold is at play? Is there anything else that someone might raise a flag and say this could be mold related?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like you and your headache specialty. You know, where do headaches come from? Well, like a lot of different places. And mold can affect a lot of different systems. So I saw we're going to give away during this event Dave Asprey's movie called Moldy, and he interviews a doctor on there who's sort of the godfather of mold, Richie Shoemaker. And I think he said that most people who turn out to have toxic mold have at least 15 symptoms that they're complaining about. So there may be a main symptom, but there's probably others. You know, maybe when you catch it early, there'll be less symptoms. But for me, I started out with getting sick easily, being fatigued, having infections, chronic swollen glands, postnasal drip. Much later, I had headaches. When I was in the very worst of it, I definitely had no mood, just flat, and then getting into some suicidal thoughts because I was just so tired that I just wanted to be asleep all the time. Yeah. Other ways it can go is to rage. They call it mold rage. Like if I now were to have a sudden exposure, I would go crazy. I would be so angry, and that's happened a few times. Asthma, shortness of breath, that's, respiratory stuff is pretty typical because a lot of it is inhaled. But it can go to so many symptoms. I had a twitchy eye for many months. I think it affects my periods being more irregular. Memory, still is something I struggle with. And it was really bad for a while. Like every time I had a thought, I would lose it and I'd have to think about it for a little while to get it back again. And still, it'll probably even happen in this lecture. I just have trouble recalling things. Some eye strain, it can create IBS, digestive disorders. Didn't exactly happen to me, although I did have the twitching, but, loss of motor function in kids, learning disabilities can contribute to cancers and heart disease. So a pretty wide range of things can happen.
It's just like a big stress on your body is what it sounds like. And then that can show up for people different ways.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Neurological things and some mood things that were pretty severe for sure. But if you're living in it, you might not even know.
Yeah, it can happen slowly and you're like, what is this? Yeah, and we'll get into this later too, but it's not really just the mold, it's the toxin this mold emits. And imagine if you took some other kind of poison, right? Like you drank, I don't know, like fertilizer or something. Would it have a range of effects on you? Certainly, it would have all sorts of mal effects on your body. And let's say you did it at a low dose. I mean, if you did it at a high dose, you would just die, I think. But if you did it at a low dose, what would happen? Probably all sorts of gastrointestinal, neurological, hormonal. It would, so it's similar. So it can affect many systems, like you said.
So it's a toxin. So I've heard you say toxic mold, and then we talked about, mold just growing in the environment. So what's the difference between mold that's growing in the forest or mold that's kind of growing unnaturally or producing toxins in your house and creating a problem? Like, how would we know, why do those things happen?
Yeah, I think this is a fair question that when people hear it for the first time, they're like, well, mold's everywhere, like big deal, and that's kind of how I was, if I had a piece of fruit with mold on half of it, I just cut it off and eat the rest. I used to live in South America. I just was pretty casual about some of this stuff. But I have a little different attitude now because as I learned from Dave Asprey, mold on food is a thing too. But I'll back up a bit. So yeah, there's lots of mold in the environment growing, what's the word? Breaking down things.
Decomposing.
Decomposing. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a job in nature. That's good.
Yeah, if you think about a forest, things are, decomposing all over. So yeah, there is mold naturally in the environment. But if you're in a forest, there's lots of things competing to grow and, things are decomposing at different rates and there's different seasons. So it's just sort of the playing field is more even in nature, I guess you could say. But once we take things out of that environment and we do things like we store grains or we process grains or coffee, or in a home, we try to make this somewhat like sterile environment, and we use drywall, which is, I think it was only invented in, I don't know, like the 60s or something. It hasn't always been around. It's just fiber. There's not much to it. If that gets wet, the fiber is made of paper, and there's mold spores in it from the trees and whatnot. So it can get wet, and it doesn't dry right away. And it doesn't have any competition like in a forest.
Yeah.
So certain types can become dominant and make you sick. And there's not every type of mold will make you sick. So if you see like black mold, a type of black mold can make you really sick, but not all mold that's black is going to make you sick. So according to my research, there's about 5 types of or classes of toxic mold that can grow in your home. Beyond that, in your food and in other environments, according to a study I can share, 300 to 400 compounds are now recognized as what we call mycotoxins. They're toxins produced by fungus. So according to that same article, 12 of them are threats to human and animal health. Dave Asprey on his interview said 200. So I'm not sure like what he's, if it's 200 mycotoxins or what, but there's only a certain number in your home or a certain number of families of mold categories that are toxic. Penicillium, Aspergillus, we both had those, and Stachybotrys, and then Fusarium, which I know less about, and Cladsporidium. So only 5 types, but they can have like subtypes, I believe, too, gotcha. And they emit these toxins. So the toxins, I kind of think of them as like, that kid from the Peanuts, the pig pen, who's like dirty, and he has this like cloud of dirt all around him. Yeah. It's like that with the mold. They're emitting this, I kind of think of it as a gas, but it's like a chemical. And that is emitted from the mold, partly as a way to like mark its territory. And even as the mold is drying, it can break off and it will release more of these toxins. So it's almost like a little, maybe as the spores are getting knocked off and dried off, it's almost like trying to survive, right? It's trying to populate. And those toxins are going around and landing on your skin. You're inhaling them, and then they're landing on your couch, your clothes. This is a big problem. Is all the places these toxins are going. And that's a sort of a part when we went to fix up our own house, we really did not understand. And unfortunately, a lot of contractors, I don't think, understand it. They say, we'll put up this plastic, we'll put in this fan, you'll be fine. And that's not correct, because they might be capturing some spores, and they can do things like you wet the mold, so it does because I said when it's dry, it'll spread more. So they wet it, they take their precautions, they're doing their best, but they don't understand the health implications. The guy who did our house, he had done a lot of houses. How does this guy do it? Probably just genetically, he's in a better place than us.
He's not affected. Yeah.
He's not affected. He doesn't get it.
Dentists taking out amalgams, right? Like if they don't do it properly and protect the mouth and protect the body, then you're going to end up sicker than when you started. So kind of like that, like you can disturb things and create almost more problems.
Yeah, exactly. We definitely created more problems once we exposed the mold, which was mostly in our walls. But once we exposed it to all our things, it was like game over. I got way sicker. Wow. And that's really, it's on us as the people dealing with it's on us to know that. And, who knows, maybe some contractors will be listening to this and learning from it. But, it's on us to learn this stuff. And I do hope we get some people listening to this who haven't been affected or are practitioners who can just learn. I mentioned to Dave Asprey that when he came out with his multi-movie, I said I didn't get around to watching it, but frankly, part of it was I just thought, well, that doesn't affect me. That's never going to affect me, that weird mold thing. And And it was probably, a year later that it completely affected me. So
I think everybody should start learning about this more and more, like not just because we're having more hurricanes, but yeah, you never know. I remember a few things stood out from that movie was like, I think you mentioned briefly, like newer houses, the way they're being constructed can put us
less
at risk because there's not
airflow.
enough airflow. And then the other thing that was like kind of mind blowing to me from that was the paint that we
Oh, yeah,
use
the
with like
fungicide and the
good
paint.
intentions, where even in drywall or paint has fungicides in it, but it makes the ones that are toxin producing somehow more aggressive and reduces our competition, their natural competition. So it actually is kind of making this situation worse, which I would
Yeah,
have
that's a good
avoided.
point. It's just like in a hospital, all the germs there are stronger. So, yeah, the strongest ones survive,
Those are kind of the
unfortunately.
worst ones. So that makes a lot of sense why, we can be okay with mold in nature, but maybe not so much in our house. If we're starting to suspect that it's an issue because of some of these symptoms, or we're just worried about it, maybe because of a recent flood damage or, dripping down the walls or something we noticed and we want to have it inspected, how would we go about doing that? What does that entail?
Yeah, so I think it's good to just talk about these practical things, and then we'll get into more of some of the treatment stuff. But I mentioned a mold inspector. We found a fantastic one. We were very lucky. My husband always checks reviews. He had a lot of good reviews of that.
Okay.
So, I know we were in a city. I don't know if it's hard in a rural area, but do your best to find, a mold inspector. If you're in a real rural area, maybe even just a really savvy home builder or contractor could go around and show you some areas that might be susceptible. But our guy would, use like a moisture meter and did this really detailed report. And then he did, like I mentioned, a drywall sample and air sample.
Air samples.
So that's giving you some information, but I want to emphasize that's not the only way to test. And as far as I know, the air sample will pick up spores, but not toxins. Both the samples are testing mold. Another test we used in our home was a dust sample for toxins. And they don't check for very many, only like 4 or 5 coming from these toxic molds I mentioned. But you go behind your refrigerator where there's a lot of dust, or you can go all around your house and get a bunch of dust. You put it in an envelope and mail it off, and it's not too expensive. And I think that's helpful to let you know kind of what you're living in and if there's toxins in there. So we had positive drywall sample, air sample, dust sample, and then you can go to the body testing. So
okay.
yeah, so my husband was sick too and working full time for, a big company, and he wanted to take a medical leave. So we were under the impression, yeah. I mean, he had some great instincts. He was like, we need to get out of this area. We need to go. And so we did, even a year ago, we went away to the desert for a while. So he wanted to do that. So we kind of were under the impression we had to prove he had this mold toxicity. So we had this urine test, which is pretty expensive, and it was positive. However, this is a little helpful hint, we really didn't need it because there's no diagnosis code for this kind of a thing. So basically, the doctor who filled out his form just said, he has chronic fatigue or fatigue. We didn't need a test for that. But if it's something you want to know, you can have a urine test. They can be occasionally false negative because if your body is so overwhelmed that you're not letting any mold toxins out, they won't show it. But there's a couple things you can do. You can take a sauna first, or you can take high dose glutathione, I think it is, first, or NACs, some things to get your liver working, so that you hopefully push out more in the sample. So that's an option too if you just kind of want it. You need to know, you want to know. And then the last one I can think of to mention is we had a nasal swab test, and this is thanks to our mutual friend, Dr. Yoshi Ram, introduced me this concept of a Marcon's infection, which is a staph infection you get in your nose, and It develops there because your immune system was compromised for some reason. It could be different reasons, but mold is a common one. And then you develop this staph infection in your nose you don't even know about, and it's dysregulating your immune system, your hormone system. So we had that test done and was positive for both of us. And that's not too expensive, and it's really easy to take. And I'll talk about later, like that treatment cycle was very helpful for me. So I think that's a good test. I guess maybe the last one I could mention, there's this something called a visual acuity test because your vision can be affected from mold toxicity. So we took an online visual acuity test, but we were okay according to the test, which I don't think was really accurate because we weren't okay.
Well, you were okay, but maybe there's like degrees.
Yeah, I mean,
of how it affects you too. It affects different systems, right?
I think maybe maybe it hadn't affected our eyes as much or something like that. Or, but that is another test that you can take that's is online, or maybe some practitioners have it in their office.
Okay, so I'm curious too about going to another climate, like getting out of your environment. How long would somebody have to go on vacation basically to the desert to test whether getting out of their house had a dramatic impact on their symptoms as a
That's
clue?
a good question. I don't think that long. I think if you went away for a week or something, you would probably notice a lifting of symptoms. Don't go to another moldy place. It's so funny. I almost feel like it follows us now. Like we rented an apartment last summer in Arizona, and it was new and cute. And then there was a monsoon, and it totally flooded into the house. And I was like, "You're kidding me." When one time we went to stay in a hotel and we had paid for it, and I went in, I was like, no way, there's no way I'm staying in here. So you just become more sensitive and more aware to things you probably didn't really pay a lot of attention to before. But yeah, I think and if you see the Moldy movie, they show a couple people who have gone away temporarily or for a really long time, which is kind of what we did. But I will say, we've moved here to the desert. It's not like you're automatically cured because you move away, because it's still in your body. So you still have to get out of your body. You still have to recover your health. I think it's just a safer environment for us in general.
So before we move off the topic of testing and detection, how would somebody find a good practitioner who's educated on all these tests? Because not all functional medicine doctors even will necessarily specialize in molds. And is that something that you're offering or planning to offer, these lab tests? Or do you have any recommendations for how somebody could interview a practitioner and find what they need to know?
Yeah, so some of the tests you can order yourself, like that dust sample test I mentioned. I'll link to that in some notes I'll give away. That I believe you can order yourself. But like the urine test, you cannot, but you have to go through a practitioner for some reason. The nasal test, you cannot.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff you just get through a contractor. Yes, some would be through a doctor. As far as finding what they call like a mold literate doctor. Right. I would just really read their website, and do they say they've treated mold before? I probably wouldn't go to someone who didn't have experience in it, unless there's someone who's really going to do the homework for you to learn about it. But like I just started with a new doctor today, and he has experience treating mold, and like he didn't really get into testing because I already know, but but he has some new treatment options that I've never used that I'm excited to try. So that's how I found him. Richie Shoemaker has people on his website. His website's called survivingmold.com. And he trains practitioners, and they're listed, and they're all medical doctors. So his protocol is more pharmaceutical based, and all the people who've trained under him are some kind of doctors who can prescribe. So that's a resource. I'm trying to think what else would be a resource for that. Those are the main ones, I can think of. there's people like me, and we're starting to offer some services for this. I can run some tests for people or help people with some protocol stuff. There's people just talking about it, and those are the people who studied it, and they want to. I think it's if you're into it, you're into it, and you're learning about it. We have Jill Carnahan on the Mold Week, and she's a practitioner for it. Dr. Ann Shippey is also a mold practitioner. So there are people out there. I definitely don't think, you have to give up. I mean, like, I work only online, so you can be anywhere in the world. You can run that nose test from anywhere. It's fine. So even if you feel like, oh, there's no one, there is someone you can find for sure.
Yeah, and the speakers on this event are probably an excellent place to start.
Some of the speakers, a few of them are doing mold work. Yeah.
So you mentioned, okay, you figure out your house, which let's acknowledge too. You mentioned it briefly, but I totally get this hesitation to go test your house because moving is a big deal. Yeah. So you might not even want to get tested. It's the same with like testing for food sensitivities or gluten sensitivity. You're like, I don't want to know because I don't want to change. But first, okay, let's say you got over that. You got your house tested. You realize it's affecting you. Maybe you got some of this functional lab work done on yourself, and you're like, okay, I need to change environments, and you're kind of in the process of that. But you mentioned that is not the full story. You really have to start detoxing and supporting your body on clearing all of this and rebuilding and healing and things like that. So tell us like what that looks like for you, what's typically a time frame that somebody would experience for that to start making progress at least, or even fully recovering, and what are some of the things somebody could start to do just even while they're in that process of moving to support their body.
Yeah, so there are some other speakers who are going to talk a little bit more about what's like protective gear while you're remediating. Darren Ingalls talked about like little just basic supplements you could take to support your immune system. So even in the beginning, if you don't know if you have mold, there's things you can do to support your immune system just because you're in that toxic environment of being in a wet house, damaged house, probably lots of chemicals in there too floating around. So that's a start. I've tried a lot of things. I wouldn't say I'm obsessive about it though. Like, I have a life and I don't always obsess about mold treatment. I go through phases where I'm looking into things or trying a new doctor, and then I'm, just kind of maintaining. And so I've tried a lot of things, but I'll tell you in a minute, like, what has worked the best. As far as time frame, I think I interviewed Ann Shippey like a year ago, and she was like, oh, it could be, like 6 months or a year. But I mean, I'm definitely beyond a year now. However, I have like gotten re-exposed. We had some items in storage that we then needed to sort out when we finally moved, to a new state. So, it wasn't like a straight line, and it rarely is. I don't think so.
It depends too. Maybe if somebody's going like all out, this is my number one focus to detox. It's on all the time, or I'm seeing some progress, fitting it in where I have time. Like, it'll change the timeline, right?
Yeah, it definitely made me a different sort of practitioner to go through something so chronic myself. Like, I get it now that you don't always want to put in the time. Like, sometimes you're just like, I'm busy. Like, I don't want to deal with this right now. And then you kind of get back into it. And I think that's, kind of okay. I just have learned a lot more, grace around all this. So yeah, I think if you kind of make it your full-time job, it could probably go faster. And some people just literally can't work, so they do make it their full-time job. I mean, I didn't have any workers' comp or anything I could use. I was self-employed. I was uninsured for that kind of a thing. So, I definitely lost work time for sure. But, I didn't want to just completely lose all the momentum of my business for this. So yeah, it was up and down, but I've learned little things along the way from this practitioner, from that one. Also for me, just to complicate things a little bit more, Mold, anything the body rarely is like on its own, right? So, I also, like I mentioned earlier, I've had Epstein-Barr virus really flare up again for me. I found out I had kind of early stage Hashimoto's at the same time. I just this spring found out I had a parasite. So I have multiple things that all feed each other, and most people do, frankly. So maybe the earlier you find it out, the better all this would be, to prevent that. So I have a lot of different things to treat. We'll just put that on the side for now. We need to get into that.
Right. So,
but it's good to know.
Yeah, it's good to know. It's not, and it's probably, like you mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of different ways it can show up in your body. So it's not just mold that you're treating. You're probably somebody's working on their gut healing at the same time. They're probably, working on supporting their immune system at the same time. And there's lots of different things. So for detoxing, I heard you say like sauna or glutathione types of things, which are general, just supporting detox. Is there anything really specific for mold, or is it more general like that you're just trying to get things flowing and get it out?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways to support the detox pathways in the gut. So I want to tell you, finally we can simplify the conversation. I'll tell you the 3 that have been the best for me.
Okay.
So number 1 was after I found out I had this Marcon's infection in my nose, I started doing nasal washes with distilled water. I see. Can you see? I'm looking at my notes, but as I brought it, I use this kind of nasal pump thing.
Okay.
I love it. And then I use this little salt packets. It's like gentle salt to put in. And then I've used this product called Nasal Clear that has some herbs and probably some, I think, silver. This is kind of like through a doctor only. I've also used colloidal silver in there. I forgot to bring that over. I've used this product called Mycoregen, which is also through a practitioner. This was a little more gentle for me. When I started out with this guy, I was having some detox symptoms.
Just for rinsing your nose with us?
Yeah.
It detoxed your whole body?
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah, a lot was happening just with this stuff. I'd feel achy and stuff the next day. So I couldn't even finish this. So I kind of took a break, and then I found out about this one, and this is more gentle for me. And I need to retest. I don't know if I still have it, but I would say even though there was some detox reaction, that whole family of stuff was good for me, and probably just for people remediating their home, just to do a salt wash, just to get that stuff out of your nose that you're getting up in there every day.
Is that one of the main exposures, is breathing in the spores or the toxins then? Is that the way they were affected for the most part?
Yeah, I think the number 1 is respiratory, and then it can also just go through your skin too. So while you're remediating your home, you should be in protective gear. You shouldn't be handling things. So that's number 1. Okay. Number 2, we'll start with we'll do the pleasant one next, is sauna. Because number 3 is not pleasant. So we were just using a regular gym sauna.
Okay.
And a lot of practitioners will say, oh, that's not even worth it. They are supposedly a lot less effective. I need to look up this study, but I just learned the other day that supposedly like a heat sauna, like at your gym, you release 97% water, 3% toxins. But a far infrared sauna, which actually we just purchased one yesterday, is supposedly 20% toxins are leaving and 80% water. Yeah. So I've never used one. I've just never, they're expensive, and we were in the middle of a lot of chaos. Yeah, but I got a pretty good deal on just like a personal sauna, and we'll see. I just felt like I'm not done yet with detoxing, and we're a little more settled. So let's try this sauna. But yeah, even in this supposedly 3% sauna, when you're in a sauna, you activate these things called heat shock proteins that they go around and fix, they kind of kill off damaged cells or activate cells to repair themselves. So once you get hot, you a lot of magic happens. A lot of things are repaired. That's why you can often see with a urine test after a sauna, you pushing out toxins. But you need to, be aware of that. You need to take a shower, clean with like a non-toxic soap afterwards, even your hair. Don't be, keep kind of know all those towels and stuff are toxic now. And you can take a binder. So you can take a charcoal or a clay when you go in the sauna to absorb some toxins that come out through your gut. And then you should have some electrolytes afterwards, ideally, to replenish. So that's pretty easy. It feels nice and kind of nourishing when you're sick. So that's a good one. And then the last one is a little more intimidating, but it's actually not that bad. Excuse me. It was a coffee enema.
Yeah.
So I had heard about these for a long time, and I was like,
I remember
no,
talking to you about this before, and you're like, no. But I was like, yes.
Yeah, it sounds horrible. I mean, in our culture, we don't really use enemas. In other cultures, they do. I was a little intimidated, but I had read Jay Davidson's book about detoxing and interviewed him, and he was encouraging it. So what happens when you use the coffee enema is the coffee goes in just the very lower part of your intestines, and it's absorbed to your liver, and there's a compound in the coffee, I forget what it's called, but when it gets into your liver, it makes this tremendous amount of glutathione, which is like a big antioxidant. And then you're there with the coffee, you're holding it in, and the blood is passing through the liver. I think if you do a full coffee enema, it's like your blood is cleaned 4 times over, like your entire blood supply is cleaned. Really? So it's pretty cheap. It's a little time consuming, but it's pretty easy. And it's like this super treatment for detox, an antioxidant. So you can take expensive, glutathione supplements, and, we've tried all different ones, and nothing has compared to a coffee enema for me.
I 100% agree. I've had dramatic experiences where I was in a lot of pain or really feeling toxic effects from when they spray pesticides and things like that.
Oh, wow.
I had known they were spraying the apartment area and things like that. I could just smell it and I felt really sick after. Nothing works like that. So, I mean, get over whatever grossness you feel about it. And Dr. J's podcast, he has this really good episode, I think, where he explains the how and the why, and then how to mop up the reactions with charcoal and clay and stuff like that. So I always tell people just go listen to that.
Oh yeah, we should maybe link to that. Yeah, and I have a little video I made on how I do them. And it's just like with a sauna, you want to take a clay or a charcoal. You do it first thing in the morning, before you eat or anything. Lots of fluids. But I mean, I feel like I can just throw a car after just so energized. And I'm not really a caffeine person. I have to be a little careful not to do it for too long. And some people, but you don't exactly get the caffeine in the same way. If you tolerate coffee well, you might not even notice it. But for me, I can notice a little buzz, but it's not it's not a bad feeling. And just when you're fatigued and your body's going through a lot, to just suddenly feel woohoo was really nice. Yeah,
it clears a lot of stuff. So I knew you were coming with that when you said number 3 is the unpleasant one. I know you didn't like them, but I'm glad you've come
Nobody
around.
wants to talk about that. Yeah, and I will say, I don't know you listening, your medical conditions, don't run out and do a coffee enema. Sure. I'm a little cautious about recommending it, and it's not to be done every day. Yeah. I think ideally for me, if I could do it a couple times a week, that would be good. And there's other ways to do enemas too, other things you can put in them. But I mean, it's funny to me, of all the things that could be done with supplements and everything, these are simple things.
Yeah.
So,
like you said, even with the sauna, I don't think we're saying necessarily this is for you, go do it. It's more of you should really learn about this and see if it's something that could help you.
Yeah, and some practitioners have like a far infrared sauna in their office that you can rent or whatever. So that could be, another way to get into it without too much expense. And yeah, I mean, I guess not everyone can tolerate a long time in a sauna, especially if you're very toxic. Sometimes you can only be in there for 5 minutes or you need the temperature turned down. I've tolerated it pretty well, but we're all different.
All different. Well, very cool. I think you mentioned you had a raffle or something like that.
Yeah, I want to just raffle like some of the products I like.
Okay.
Just for fun. So I'll do that on my social media on the day this airs. So if you watch it 3 months from now, we won't be raffling it anymore. I'll just raffle it that day. And wanted to mention, at our own product store, we carry more like, vitamin D and it's like some of the things Dr. Engels recommended, zinc. So we carry some of that basic stuff. We do like a supplement consultation. But I'll also create a page with like notes from this talk and, little links to you can buy this kind of stuff. Just make it easy. Mm-hmm. So I just get it like on Amazon. It's nothing hard to get a hold of. And then, if people, I really don't know with this week if people will just be more in the thick of fixing their house or, if eventually they'll want some mold testing or help with their own protocol. So we'll have just like a contact form where people can, if they're like, I do think I need help, you can just reach out to us. And we're just trying to connect people with the resources they need. Yeah,
so important. Do you have any other services or pages or anything like that you want to send people to learn more?
We'll have pretty extensive notes on the show notes and the blog, and I'll give away because I know it's hard to remember everything I just said, and it's a lot of new terms we're throwing around, maybe like glutathione and stachybotrys and stuff. So we'll have it written out so you can, kind of have that. It's free. You can just so you have that for reference. And we'll have links to some things. My background is mostly doing women's hormones. And when I first had this condition come up, I thought, this isn't related to anything. But I'm surprised how many women have been affected and know it already and are looking for help. So, they're out there, and it is dovetailing with, it could be affecting your fertility or miscarriage rates or that kind of a thing. So
absolutely.
Maybe I think mold affects everyone. It's indiscriminate, but maybe I'll kind of develop over time a specialty for kind of the women's health angle of mold.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for sharing your story and letting us learn from everything that you've been through this past couple of years. It's really helpful. I think,
I hope so.
Not just for the people that are going through these tragedies and like rebuilding from the hurricanes, but people all over are being affected by mold and just starting to learn about it probably. So hopefully this will raise awareness, and this is just a fantastic event that you're putting together. So thank you for all the time and effort that you're putting towards it.
You're welcome. Yeah. I just think we need like a little pin, like a little awareness pin. It looks like a bunch of mold spores or something. Mold awareness.
Mold awareness. There you go.
It hasn't really caught on yet, but you're right. It probably will someday. Well, thank you, Erin. I appreciate you coming and being a good listener and interviewer.
My pleasure. Talk to you soon.